Thanks for tuning in to the Peoplz and Dragons. The following presentation is the result of active players in the community who dictate the actions of these characters by way of the Peoplz and Dragons interactive RPG game show. If you're enjoying the content, then please like, share, and maybe subscribe. If you want to join in on the action, visit our website at pndrpg.com. Village. Freaks in Nature. Episode 1. We see an old man walking away from his group's campsite, draped in layers of robes and holding his hands to his face to keep them warm. The further he gets from the camp, the more numb his hands grow. He finds a clearing in the woods where the moon shines through, and he kneels in the snow and begins to pray. We hear Earl's cold, raspy throat whisper prayers into the blowing wind. He prays for guidance and favor, and in return promises his full devotion, and he thanks the Almighty One for everything the Almighty One does. We see an ebony-skinned woman with silver hair perched up in a tree with her legs up, carving the skin off of an apple, watching the old man pray. She then looks back over their camp of 10 to 12 with multiple dim-lit fires as not to attract attention from the crazies. Her and 2 others are on night watch. This should be the last night before their camp reaches their destination, though it doesn't matter because being on the lookout was light work for Raven. We cut to the early morning and see everyone from the party gathering themselves to prepare to move again. Walking around the campsite, we see a tall man in his mid-30s playing an acoustic guitar, singing a morning tune with a big, inspiring smile within his long, dark beard. The tune looks to be enjoyed by most of the site and was the only pleasant thing they've been treated to since fleeing their old settlement. We see a small group congregating with the camp leader off to the side of the camp. Within the group, we see the athletic, heroic, and wise Henry, who formed this group of survivors. A strong and seasoned woman named Annalisa. Glued to her side, Harmony, a young woman who looks like she could be 16, a rebellious air about her. The old man we saw praying earlier, Earl Birmingham, is also present. Beside him, the strong and militant Jay Strickland, and last, a tense-looking Anthony Carbone. Among themselves, they discuss their next moves. Approaching the group, we see the Mason brothers being tailed by their gray Siberian husky. Before joining in on the group planning, Joseph Mason grabs his kid brother Jonathan's neck playfully and pulls him in for a brotherly hug with one arm, borderline being a headlock. Johnny, just listen to me for a change. I need you to trust me. Johnny shrugs him off, and big bro Joe Mason hits him in the rib and tells him to prepare to head out. Before joining in, Joe walks up to Harmony and asks her if she could keep an eye on Bandit again. Harmony was never opposed to handling Bandit, and the two have become great companions over the past few months. Annalisa tells Harmony that she'll be right back, and her and Joe join in on the conversation on planning. The group as a whole agrees with Henry's route to the school, and Jay Strickland strongly suggests having Connor O'Toole act as a guide since he is the one most familiar with the area. We see Connor teaching and giving great advice on minimizing risk in dangerous situations. Connor, another with military background, was a very kind and wise strategist, as well as a wealth of knowledge. Strickland calls him over to the group and fills him in on the plan. All plans are finalized and everyone is confident, part due to Henry's profound leadership and inspiration that he provides. We jump hours ahead and see that something has gone incredibly wrong. The party has somehow caught the attention of a massive pack of raving madmen who can be seen behind and beside the party, sprinting, leaping, and falling over each other to rip them apart. These things, they were like people, but lunatics, and their eyes would bulge out of their sockets. Think how Arnold Schwarzenegger looked suffocating on Mars in the film Total Recall. Ever since the world went to shit, these freaks have been attacking everything in sight. They just pummel, bite, grab, and tear you apart limb by limb for what seems like an undeniable urge that they can't fight. We see all the settlers sustain their pace despite having to haul their resources. The majority of the entire camp were no older than their mid-30s. Among them, a brolic 6'5" man carrying a good portion of the camp supplies over his shoulder, as well as old man Bubba in the other arm. Bryant the Bull Fuller leaps over logs while traversing the rough terrain like a drill during his high school football glory days. A freak lunges at Anthony Carbone from behind a tree, but gets impaled upon a makeshift spear created and distributed to all of the settlers who could use them. The hammered ends of hollow metal pipes, sharpened for the kill, was the craftsmanship of Jack, and what most would consider a junker genius. Jay Strickland, Raven, and Deacon Myers, who are all on the party's perimeter, all notice the oncoming freaks running toward them in their path to their destination. As discussed, each of them gives the signal. Carbone looks to Henry and tells him that they are going to need to split the group up. Henry was thinking the same and asks if Joe Mason can help him with the larger group while Carbone takes the Plan B route. Joe Mason and Henry head to the school through the Plan B route with the bulk of the group, while Carbone takes a smaller, more covert group another direction to split the horde of their attackers. Joe Mason looks for his brother Jonathan in the chaos and can't find him, but runs into Earl, who is trying to leave with Carbone's smaller group. Distracted, Joe tells Earl to head with him to the school as planned, but Earl declines. Joe frowns. "Come on, Earl, now's not the time." Earl pulls away. "I'm sorry, Joe, but the Almighty One is calling me over with Tony." First, Joe's missing brother, and now this mystified old man muddying up hours of planning. Joe hasn't been this frustrated since the night he had to fire a 48-year-old pregnant employee for driving her pickup truck through Mason's Bar and Grill's entrance. Then her water broke. Carbone, running by, grabs Earl and tells Joe it's okay and that he'll look after him. While being pulled, Earl turns around and shouts at Joe, "Have faith, Joseph." Joe rolls his eyes, and then he and Bandit catch up with the others. Each party heads their separate ways, both tailed by hungry freaks that will pull their innards out and eat them if they catch up. We see the majority of the group finally reach the high school, which can be seen up on the hill. Jay Strickland takes down a freak swiftly with his military combat knife, being frugal with his rifle ammo. Supported by Titus, a nerdy but intelligent young man who is way more prepared for the apocalypse thanks to his mangas and video game knowledge prepping him, or so he thinks. He plunges his self-made forearm blades that won him Cosplayer of the Year at Manga Madness 07 directly into the body of a freak and begins to stab it repeatedly while shouting dramatically until the freak dies. Titus stands up heroically, and after making sure someone is looking, he retracts his forearm blade simultaneously. Danny Berland and his little sister looks highly impressed by Titus's moves. Danny, more so into the gadgetry on his wrist, steps in for a closer look. He touches the wrist mounts and can see how it was made. "Dude, this is good work here. Titus, when did you make these? Could I?" Danny gestures towards his own wrist. Titus pulls away a bit. Suddenly, we see the ravenous freak leap back up to its feet behind Danny, its stomach flopping out of its abdomen. Just as it goes to grab at Danny, the blunt end of a silver ornamental staff clobbers the freak in the head, knocking it to the ground. We see Tao Yang wielding the staff while keeping the freak pinned to the ground as Connor O'Toole thrusts his makeshift spear through its head, painting the snow orange with its thick, coagulated blood. Jay Strickland, a tall, 6-foot, intimidating man with militaristic poise, marches over to check to see if it's dead. Then angrily turns to Titus and Danny, but just as he opens his mouth, the more diplomatic Connor O'Toole steps in and pats Jay on the shoulder as if to say, "I got this." Jay Strickland and a few others continue up the hill to check to see if the coast is clear. Connor reminds Titus and Danny, two capable and heroic young men, to focus and not let their guard down. Of all the settlers with military background, Connor O'Toole was likely everyone's favorite. He was full of wisdom and was a great communicator. After Connor's lecture, the stoic Tao Yang inches up to Titus and offers his 2 cents. These are not men anymore. They are warm-bodied corpses possessed with dark matter. Though mindless, you must behead them, like the character from your cartoons. Tao hands Titus one of Titus's Jax Erlin mangas that he must have dropped out of his bag along the way. Suddenly, Gramps comes shambling through the woods, shouting at everyone, informing them that Henry, in an attempt to rescue a survivor, had taken a bad fall and is now trapped as a few others fend off freaks around him. Stressed, Joe Mason rubs his hand through his hair. He knows that someone has to help Henry, however, Jonathan is higher on his list of priorities. Connor sees the confliction and tells Joe to take everyone to the school as planned and that he'll go back into the woods for the others, with Gramps leading him. Jay Strickland silently takes down another rushing freak and tells everyone the path to the school is now clear. The settlers, led by Jay Strickland and Joe, arrive to the schoolyard. The scrambling and babbling of freaks can be heard echoing throughout the halls from outside. Freaks attack anything they see. Their lunacy seems to create some sort of tunnel vision where once they're set on something, it remains their priority until it's dead. Joe turns to everyone. Let's take this slow and careful, okay? We need to secure the inside and especially the perimeter for when it's time to bring the rest of our group in later. Bandit begins growling at the approaching horde of slower-moving freaks, likely injured from their previous scuffles. Joe readies his spear, tells them that he'll take a glance around the school and clear up what he can, and report back. A little girl's voice speaks. "You're going in alone? Bullshit." Stepping forward, we see Jack, a 12-year-old girl with a buzzed cut, overalls with a mangy thermal, hands him one of the sharper spears of the batch she made last night. Joe thanks her, and he and Bandit head out alongside of the school. We see Jay Strickland casing the corners carefully, making sure it's clear as the others follow, Jack and Tao Wang being the extra eyes from the flank. They reach the first classroom to their right. Jay Strickland gets ready to peek into the room when suddenly, Titus grabs him by the arm and quiets everyone down. Pulled down over Titus's head are a pair of binoculars he fashioned into a face accessory. Danny squints. "What are you wearing?" Titus turns to Jay Strickland, who has the face like he also is wondering the same. Titus tells them that he calls it his Byakugami Gekken eyes. They give me X-ray vision, and there's a freak approaching the doorway across the hall. As with all of Titus's gadgets, they are all well named, but he exaggerates a bit. They really are thermal imaging goggles, military grade and modified. Jay Strickland rolls his eyes and ignores Titus's claims of X-ray vision, but does ponder how the dude was able to get his hands on military grade equipment that he hasn't seen since he's been in the military. Tao swiftly runs to the wall across the hall and awaits for Jay Strickland to bait the freak out. Jay makes himself visible, and the tall, muscular freak, dressed in lightweight gym clothes, whips its head toward him. Its gaping mouth hangs low as its jaws sway partially on its hinges. The freak repeatedly flexes its muscles like wrestlers did when pumping themselves up with the spirit of the fans while ferociously power-walking toward Jay Strickland. Just as it reaches the entryway, Tao Yang cracks its face open with his staff, smashing one of its eyes, then strikes it to the ground, then follows it up by bashing its skull in with his battle staff without making any alarming sounds. Jay Strickland gets everyone's attention. If we remain careful, we can clear this out with ease, corner by corner if we keep this up. Just try to stay quiet. He looks at Danny, the only other person with a gun, and tells him to only use it if he must. Harmony looks like she wants to say something, but stops and looks at her bodyguard, Annalisa. Annalisa nods as if to say, "Go on." Harmony glides her fingers through her pastel pink hair that blends perfectly into her black roots. "Alright, so, with the proper resources and infrastructure, I could structure a barricade and implement a secure alert system, Jay Strickland thinks that that's a great idea and says that he'll certainly be able to help determine a good, advantageous location as a base of operations. Annalisa playfully nudges Harmony on the shoulder. Harmony recommends a computer lab of some sort, if possible. Another settler who had tagged along and up until now has kept to himself, an older gentleman with unkempt, shaggy white hair, kinda crazy looking, Randolph Parson, pops out with his pocket calculator swinging from his neck in place of a crucifix and suggests that someone heads to the second floor as he points at a sign on the wall pinpointing where the computer labs are. Danny has a shotgun, he can go up there and I can go with him. Danny goes from being focused to wired when he is volunteered to head to the second floor. However, Danny does have a need for some things that could be found in a computer lab. Danny leaves his little sister with Tal Yang because he knows he'll be able to protect her, and he and Randolph head upstairs, clearing the chairs and debris in the way of the stairwell. After securing all of the first floor classrooms and taking out 2 to 3 freaks, Jay Strickland and company head to the gym that has oddly enough been chained shut. Jay signals to Jack and Yao to watch their flank as Jay Strickland fires a burst of rounds at the chains. This triggers the attention of a few freaks who make some kooky sounds that echo down the hall as 3 come running from who knows where down the hallway toward the party until one of the 3 realizes they are running next to another and tackles one of the other freaks to the floor, and the 2 begin pummeling each other. Annalisa tells Jay Strickland that she's gonna do an additional sweep of the whole school for any hidden locations or breaches. Jay gives the signal, and he and Annalisa break through the gym door, guns and spears drawn, where they are immediately charged by a handful of freaks. Meanwhile, the 3rd flanking freak is darting toward Jack, Yao, and Harmony. Harmony, still lightly shell-shocked, goes to grab for Annalisa's arm, forgetting that Annalisa is over helping Jay Strickland. Tal steps forward in front of Jack, and Jack steps back a bit. Tal spins his staff around his body, his traditional monk robes flapping around gracefully along with the rattling of his many blessed charms dancing around his neck, his Eastern casa hat unmoved. "Creature, I will purify you," Tal whispers. Just as the freak gets in range, Tal slaps his staff into the inner foot of it, causing it to lose its footing and do a split, as Tal spins twice, bringing his staff across the head of the freak, smashing it open like a pumpkin. Tal, stepping up to the hideous creature alone, inspires Harmony. However, she grows tense when she sees Annalisa being attacked by more freaks approaching from the gym. Jay Strickland plunges his knife into the head of one while pushing it into the others, creating space. Titus guards his shoulder and stabs away at another freak, landing multiple strikes into its head like Connor advised. Annalise slips on some blood and she is tackled to the ground by a freak. The freak begins slamming his fists down onto Annalise's face like a gorilla, knocking 3 to 5 teeth out of her mouth. Harmony's pupils shrink when she sees Annalise go down and freezes. Annalisa draws a secret pistol she had stored away and sends a bullet through its head, pushing it off. She gets up and shakes off the pain. The gunshot causes the 2 freaks fighting in the hallway to look up and refocus back on Tal, guarding the flank. The freak, laughing hysterically, charging towards Harmony, reaches her but is immediately yoked up in a headlock by Annalisa, who then snaps its neck in 2. Harmony exhales as Annalisa takes a knee, out of breath while spitting up blood. Harmony arriving to her aid. Titus gets outmuscled by a freak that is trying to eat his face, forcing him onto the bleachers as another freak comes crab walking out from under them and begins working its way over to Titus as well. The 2 freaks leap at Tal Yang but are struck before reaching him. One pushes onward as Tal swings and misses his attack and is tackled. Suddenly, 1 gunshot followed by 3 burst shots rings out in the gymnasium. The heads of all the attacking freaks explode, except for the crab-walking one that is limping toward Titus, who then gets up and kills it. Jay Strickland stands with his gun pointed, regretting having to use it, but it was necessary. He looks at all of his party and says, "I'm going to check the locker rooms, then we can head upstairs to follow up with Randy and Danny." Tal Yang looks around and realizes something. Where's Jack? We see Danny slowly walking through the halls, shotgun drawn. Close behind him, we see Randolph with a notebook and pen, writing with a machete tucked under his arm. He and Danny are walking into classrooms, taking notes of what resources are available and can be utilized, and what it will take to extract and preserve its use. Randolph Parson has a few screws that have gone loose since the world has changed, but is quite the scholar on computer sciences. He'd soon learn that Danny Berlin could also throw his hat in the computer tech ring, as he shares his plans to create a CCTV network, something he couldn't do at their last settlement. He tells Randy to write down the webcams they just passed under the desks. After about 5 rooms, 3 full pages, and time spent with their combined knowledge of computers, they have pinpointed and can confirm there are enough resources here for Harmony's base defense. Danny heads to the stairwell and waits for the others before proceeding to the 3rd floor. Randy has been keeping separate notes for personal use, and is fairly close to his plans, but needs to get his hands on a fairly common piece of software utilized by school systems. Randy suggests that he and Danny hit a couple of the 3rd floor rooms to speed things up, without waiting for everyone else. They secured the 2nd floor without any issues. Danny thinks for a bit and is successfully convinced by Randy. They arrive at the first door on the 3rd floor. Danny peers through the window into the pitch black room, and with a little bit of window light, he can see a silhouette of a row of computers. Randolph anxiously asks him what he sees, when suddenly gunshots ring from Jay Strickland's rifle from within the gymnasium below them. Danny and Randolph jump. "You think everything's okay down there? Should we go?" Randolph interrupts. "That was Jay Strickland's rifle. I'm sure they're fine." "Sure my ass. My sister's down there. Watch out." Just before Danny could step away from the door, a freak's head comes crashing through the door window, slamming directly into Danny's head, busting it wide open as shards of glass sink into his wound. Danny drops his gun and falls unconscious to the floor. The freak is a tall and lanky old lady who turns her face up, cut open from the insane headbutt. She starts making clucking sounds like a chicken while pulling her head back through the glass, then headbutts the center of the door, which surprisingly leaves a massive crack in it. Randolph can't believe the strength of these things and goes to grab Danny to drag him out of the way, but not fast enough because the freak teacher comes barreling through the entire door head first, making all sorts of kooky sounds. She turns toward Randy while lurched over like she's imitating a T-Rex, both of her arms pulled up to her breasts. Randy, shocked by its bizarre behavior, lets go of the kid and attempts to get to his feet as it runs toward them both and begins to stomp on an unconscious Danny's head and neck as hard as it can, repeatedly, until bones in Danny's face begin to fracture. Randy goes to swing at the freak, hacking into her with his machete, but she then bull charges him into the wall, pinning him against it, and smashes her face into his twice, breaking his nose and hers simultaneously, as she then begins to sink her teeth into his upper lip and starts chewing and pulling it, causing excruciating pain, when suddenly a shotgun blast rings out, blowing the freak off of Randy into a locker, slowing it down. We see Jack loading Danny's shotgun with salvaged buckshot modified by her, and then quickly aims the shotgun that's half the size of her and blows his fucking head off. The kickback shakes Jack, but she remains standing. We cut to the entire group sitting in a secured computer lab on the 2nd floor. Jack and Harmony can be seen utilizing the notes drafted by Randy and Danny, but not after being proofread by Jack, who was able to alter the list based off of salvageable resources she discovered in the area, along with collected items that can be cannibalized as is, resulting in less of the surveyed resources from the computer labs being used. Harmony is hard at work designing the barricade and security layout as Jay Strickland and Annalisa help reinforce and fortify. Jay Strickland chose the perfect spot as it is easily defendable and sustainable. Tao Yang is tending to an unconscious and bleeding Danny with basic medical knowledge. Danny's little sister Ariana crying at the sight of his incredibly swollen face from the fractured bones. Randolph sits slumped up against the wall holding his shirt to his bleeding nose, lightheaded from the loss of blood, watching Danny's slow, shallow breathing. Jay Strickland places the last desktop fashioned into a barrier. He walks over to Annalisa and tells her that they're gonna hold off on securing the 3rd floor for now. We need to wait for others. We cut to an injured Henry, along with a middle-aged man, both laying in a pit of snow. A giant log has Henry pinned to the ground, and the other man has seemingly passed out. Freaks are running through the woods, attacking each other, all while pursuing Henry, who has managed to take out his assailants one by one with a knife in one hand and a guardian angel from a distance. A bullet whizzes into the dome of a freak that was passing by the moment it noticed Henry. We cut to a young male posted up in a nearby window of a home. Gordon Sundale, a 21-year-old country boy who had learned hunting from his father, and boy did it pay off. His face is painted with enjoyment as he actually impressed himself with that shot. He straightens his face when he notices Deacon Myers silently judging him for the enjoyment he's getting out of this. Deacon tells him to get ready to roll out because he's about to do it. Gordon nods. Deacon Myers is an ex-task forcer of an Illuminati agency called Shining Force, tasked with defending Earth during the Death Era. However, after losing his family and entire team to demons as a result of a suspected Illuminati setup, Deacon has felt broken and unwound. He runs into the next room and lights it on fire, which in turn gets the attention of a good majority of scrambling freaks from outside in the forest. Deacon then slides down the banister with machete and axe in hand and taunts all the freaks to meet him at the door. 2 run up to him at once. He kicks one down the steps, then hacks into the other with both axe and machete. Another one approaches and he cuts them down before leading the rest of the horde into his and Gordon's fiery death trap. Deacon leads them further into the building to the edge of a broken floor that descends deep into the basement. He leaps over the gap as the freaks, blinded by rage, fall right into the basement exits already barricaded as ceiling pieces of the burning house begin to fall into the basement, piling on top of them. Deacon exits the burning and collapsing home, as does Gordon Sundale, who we see leaping out of the top window and climbing down the water pipe with his sniper rifle strapped to his back. They go to help Henry when they find Connor O'Toole standing over Henry, fending off freaks as best as he can with his pipe spear. Gramps tends to the unconscious man and locates a pulse. He then runs over to Henry's leg and sees that it is badly squashed and he won't get far. Henry shouts out to Connor O'Toole, pointing at dozens of freaks approaching. Connor runs over to Henry and tries to pull him out with the help of Gordon and Deacon, pushing the log, but it isn't budging, and some freaks begin making it out of the building and running through the snow on fire. Henry tells Connor to leave him and take the man with him. Connor refuses, and so does Deacon. These were the last 2 men who would leave behind their comrades. Henry tells them that they are going to get Gramps and this man killed if they don't go now. Connor says nothing and scoops up the man and looks at Henry one last time and thanks him for getting them this far. And he runs off toward the school with the group. A freak comes leaping over the log and dives onto Henry, throwing wild haymakers, landing 2 good blows, busting his eye open until another freak comes and tackles that one. Dazed, Henry readies his knife for whatever is to come, when a freak comes from behind him, grabs his head and hair with both hands, and begins slamming his head into the snow, partially suffocating him as he tries to free himself from its grip, but is completely overpowered. The freak begins ripping patches of his scalp off of his head by his hair while grabbing and digging its fingers into the front of Henry's throat and begins to squeeze and pull his throat out from the front of his neck. Henry cries in pain as his throat is slowly being dug out of his neck by bare hands as his head is slammed into a rock by the crazed, bulging-eyed man. Gramps, being ushered through the snow, turns around to look back as he hears Henry being mangled and crying out in agony. If it weren't so cold, a tear would have worked its way down his face as it felt like he was turning his back on his own grandson. We see Carbone leading his group through the snow halfway to the school when suddenly Earl Birmingham stops when they approach an odd-shaped bush. Raven whistles to the group to stop and wait for Earl, who begins to praise the Almighty One and thanking him for answering his prayers. Tony Carbone walks up to Earl to see what the holdup is. Earl tells the group that the Almighty One has blessed them today and a great gift lies beyond these bushes. The bull rolls his eyes and tells them to get back moving because it's freezing when standing still. Tony Carbone can see the faith in Earl's eyes and decides to entertain the idea by going and peering through the bush. He sees a large home in what seems like the middle of nowhere. Oddly, there is no snow anywhere in the house's vicinity. Tony's face frowns at the bizarre setting. Earl pats him on the shoulder and tells him to have faith as he leads the rest of the party to the home, except for Bull, who doesn't have a religious bone in his body and flat out isn't buying it. But once he sees that everybody begins to head to the house, he heads with them. Raven heads around the building checking for any visible enemies. She comes back around and tells Carbone that she spots 3 on the first floor alone and 1 on the steps. Tony, Bull, and Raven agree to make this sweep fast and in a hurry and devise a plan. Raven enters from the kitchen window sneakily as Bull breaks in through the front door, ramming and knocking over the 2 freaks loitering in the vestibule of the big estate. Carbone follows behind him with a pipe spear and plunges it into the head of one of the fallen freaks. Raven steps in and swiftly jabs her combat knife through the other one's head, killing it. We see Kalen Ortez, a frail and timid little guy, already finished searching the shed out back, procuring all sorts of goodies and stashing some. Kalen, an orphan who had spent most of his life homeless, has made it a living earning his keep by providing much-needed scavenged resources to his allies. Anthony Carbone heads upstairs with Bull behind him as they both encounter another, much larger freak. He plunges the spear into the freak's ribcage and charges forward into a window, sending the freak flying through and out of the second-story window, falling to its death and snapping its neck. After about 5 to 10 minutes, the entire estate is secured and the group begins ransacking the place. Anthony Carbone isn't opposed to religion, but has to admit that the stuff that they are finding in this house was well worth the risk, and thanks Earl. Earl makes good conversation with everyone while they're searching through the house. Even Bull, who despite Earl's overt religiousness, they both get along pretty well. We see Jonathan Mason searching through the kitchen for cooking ingredients, foods, utensils, and various cooking supplies. Johnny was head chef at his family-run restaurant, Mason's Bar and Grill, with his brother, Joe Mason. Perhaps his people could use a well-cooked meal after today's big move. Johnny ends up stumbling upon a pistol fastened to the roof of the bottom cupboards. He looks around and stashes it into his hoodie. He stops to think for a moment as he stands in someone else's kitchen with a sack of their goods and a pistol tucked within him. He can't believe how much his life has changed over the course of less than a year. The thought is enough to make him emotional, bringing some tears to his light blue eyes. He walks over and sees a picture of a family on the refrigerator and reminds him of his parents, lovely mother, father, and brother, which reminds him that Joe is probably pissed. Earl enters the kitchen and sees a teary-eyed Jonathan. Earl gives him some uplifting words and encourages him not to let the world overcome him, for the Almighty One will see him through these hard times. Earl nods and tells him also not to worry about his brother, because once he learns what they found here, the risk will have been justified, and he won't be able to deny the Almighty One's guidance through Earl. Jonathan, slightly creeped out by Earl at the moment, thanks him again and continues off to search for more items. We cut to Bull, looting a sunroom, filling his bag up with knickknacks, decorative ornaments, and plant seeds he can use to spruce up their new settlement. Brian Fuller, the one they call Bull, actually was a very kind individual who was always making it his priority to motivate and keep the spirits of others up, which made him the glue to his football team and the settlement. We cut to the office on the second floor where we see Kaylin searching through it like a pro, leaving no stone unturned and stowing everything away in his bags and endless pockets. Tobias Touchstone walks into the room, startling Kaylin. Tobias apologizes for scaring him and states how awesome it is that Kaylin is able to rummage through a place he's never been so thoroughly. Kaylin doesn't say anything but nods as Tobias' words make him feel good about himself. Tobias holds up a finger and tells Kaylin, "You're missing one thing though." Kaylin looks confused as Tobias walks over to a desk ornament and pushes it in and turns it, triggering a bookshelf to open up. Tobias sees Kaylin's reaction and laughs. Tobias doesn't claim to be a scavenger, but at one point in time in his life he used to buy a lot of unnecessary things with all of his songwriting money, and he knew a Hidemaster safe when he seen one, as he had quite a few of those throughout many of his extra homes, hiding all sorts of special things. Kaylin ransacks the hidden bookshelf and discovers even more things, including a large cache of heavy medication and narcotics. Tobias waits for Kaylin to leave the office when he hurries over to the secret compartment and locates another button within it that opens up a double compartment, a section commonly used for the special stuff, and lo and behold, he finds a powdery substance in a bag and a bottle with 3 pills. A bead of sweat drips down Tobias' forehead, as this was the ultimate battle that he's been facing. He musters up just enough willpower to leave the powder, but he does take 1 pill for later and is satisfied with his current level of willpower and control, and figures just 1 pill will take the edge off and not be too harmful. Earl, continuing the path shown to him, leads the group to a hidden hatch to a mini doomsday cellar filled to the brim with noodles and boxes of fortune cookies. The group celebrates knowing that they now have food to eat for another short while. They load all of the food onto Bull and prepare to head out. Tony Carbone does one more sweep of the cellar and uncovers a hidden partial cache of ammo and comes walking out of the cellar with it. We see Kaylin outside behind the tree, checking to see if anyone is looking as he stores what seems like an endless amount of extra loot into an undiscoverable hollow of a tree, when suddenly he hears a group of freaks approaching the estate. We see Raven standing on the second floor balcony of a recreational room organizing her water skins that she found and filled with fresh filtered water when a stone flies upward, hitting the rail. She spots where it came from and sees Kaylin up in a tree parallel to her, and he seems to be pointing west while hiding. Raven looks westward and sees a freak sprinting straight toward Jonathan, his back facing toward the woods as he fastens more cooking supplies and noodles to Bull. Raven walks back into the recreational room and removes a halberd from the grips of a knight statue, then leaps over the balcony and lands behind Johnny. Raven is ex-military, whose past is a mystery and whom no one really knows. However, like Deacon Myers, she seems to know more about everyone else, as well as what's happening with the world, though tight-lipped. As the freak now has its eye set on her, it charges at her. As a result of her previous occupation, Raven's brain has been fitted with an imperfect and partially damaged implant called the Libra cell, a mechanism that subconsciously records pertinent information that the user receives to be recalled, like an epiphany during a necessary scenario. The tech was experimental and was used in a handful of super soldiers and agents, including the silver-haired Raven. All the audible information recorded from conversations with Connor, Deacon, and Tal's experience with these maniacs emerge into her brain as Raven develops a plan of attack. Raven thrusts her halberd into the groin of the freak, boring into it, then pulls it out and thrusts it back into the neck, decapitating it. The entire group exits the building, everyone carrying something. Earl Birmingham steps out and thanks the Almighty One again before they all head toward the school. Back at the school, we see Joe Mason finishing up his stealthy sweep of the school, sneaking up and picking off freaks using himself and his Siberian Husky Bandit to bait them out. Joe found Bandit about 8 months ago during a resource run, and the two have been together ever since. Bandit spots one last freak and barks at it to bait it, when Joe leaps out from behind it, impaling the freak through the head. Joe thinks to himself that, if he were still in the acting business, he'd be more than fit for an action role. Brendan Fraser, eat your heart out. Joe begins to walk back to the entrance of the school to meet with the others when Bandit senses something back towards the east of the school where Joe just came from. Joe asks Bandit what's wrong. He thought that they cleared everything out, but Bandit seems highly agitated and runs off. Joe feels his little brother's behavior has had a bad influence on Bandit, but he gets a pass. He sighs, then follows the dog to the east to see what's wrong. Joe arrives back to the east of the woods and sees Bandit growling intensely at what looks like nothing more than a short dead tree, maybe 7 feet tall, give or take. Joe asks Bandit what's his deal, just go pee on it if you want. Bandit starts barking at it and growling like he has never done before, and Joe does notice that not only was the odd-looking tree not there before, but it just got closer. Bandit starts barking at it and growling like he never has before, when Joe does notice that not only was this odd-looking tree not here before, but it definitely just got closer. Joe squints at the tree and takes a step closer for a better look, when suddenly the tree begins to tremble and all of the muscles on the left side of Joe's neck begin to bunch up and roll upward into his neck like window blinds. The sheer agonizing pain from the massive knot of a cramp brings Joe to his knees instantly. He can't even speak as he grips his neck, trying his hardest to hold the muscles in place as they jerk, writhe, and twist all within his neck. Joe looks up and sees that the tree had definitely gotten closer as Bandit barks and panics in confusion. His adrenaline pumping, Joe jumps to his feet, turns and hightails it back to the school, followed by Bandit. Stumbling into the school and brought in by Tao Yang, Joe is unable to form words out of fear of his muscles contorting further. Tao sees the giant knot of clumped up muscles moving under Joe's ear at the top of his neck as Joe moans in agony, unable to explain what caused it, let alone shout, but he is able to point to the east. Tao looks over there but sees nothing. Strickland lifts Joe up and carries him into the room just as the other two groups arrive up the hill and make their way into the school as planned, all except for Henry. Tao looks into Connor's disappointed eyes as they pass each other and sees the answer to his question. Gramps, assisted by Anthony Carbone, and Jonathan get to work tending to Randolph's broken nose, Danny's mangled head, and the unconscious man Connor brought in, and Joe Mason. Deacon Myers checks everyone that enters the building for bite marks or particular injuries and finds none, while unable to determine what's wrong with the unconscious man. Jack and Jay Strickland lock up shop, barricading the entryways with secure reinforcement. The security system Harmony is working on is underway. Jay Strickland explains everything that had happened to the rest of the party as everyone gets settled in just in time for the sun to set.
Run to the altar, feel like it's over. Your soul is near its end and there's nothing left to pretend. dying.